Welcome back, Wonders. It's Naidra. So after Blizzard announced the patch that was coming out yesterday and the buffs to the Sorceress that were coming specifically for the Ball Lightning uniques that they updated, I was really excited and I really wanted to jump in. Although we all know that there's a significant drop in the players that are actually active on Diablo, and it seems like a lot of them are mostly just bots, I still really wanted to give it a shot and I wanted to test those out and show you guys exactly what I found. So today I'm going to show you guys the updated 2 new uniques for the Ball Lightning Sorceress and see what you guys think as well. Before we jump into it though, if you guys have not yet subscribed to the channel, please don't forget to do so below. Also, if you'd like to support the channel as well, the best way you can do that is by checking out the merch store that we've got linked in the bio as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in and see exactly what this is going to look like. So I will say there actually has been a couple of builds this season which have been doing pretty good for the Sorceress, and I've posted a couple of those too, and it's been a lot of fun to play, but unfortunately they just haven't been quite as good as the Barbarian or as some of the other classes that are out this season. And the other part of it too is the ones that are really pushing those boundaries or pushing those limits, those ones tend to take advantage of snapshots and things that the game isn't really intended to do, which is really frustrating, and honestly we really shouldn't have to resort to those things to be able to come up with a good build and to be able to have fun with the character class that you want to play with. For now, the first one we're going to test out here is going to be Okuns Catalyst, and that's the one that basically replaced the gravitational aspect. So let's take a look and see how that's going to run. Now, the thing that I really enjoy about this is that it is really fast. And similar to the chain lightning spear that we've used in the past, this one does allow you to teleport frequently, so you really never have to stop. It's really, really fun to play, but I will say it's not necessarily the most comfortable or the easiest build to play, any of the Sorceress builds for that matter, and that's because you're really having to button mash all of the time, which can be exhausting, and I'm feeling like I'm getting carpal tunnel. But anyways, that aside, looking at this, especially when we're testing this in the outer world, you can see we're zipping through everything and it's really fun. It looks cool. This is exactly what we want to see when we're playing with the Sorceress. But the issue here is that this is only happening in the outer world. And so you definitely can take this into a pit, but unfortunately, it really can't do too well past pit tiers 105. Maybe you can get to 110. You might be able to go a little further if you're snapshotting, but without using that snapshotting trick, it just isn't doing as much as we need to be able to beat pit tiers 110 and higher. Now, we are seeing damage in the billions, which is great, but we know that we need a lot more than that in order to be able to take down pit tiers 130, 140, or what others are doing in pit tiers 150. So that's what that one looks like. Let's go ahead and swap it out for the Strike of the Stormhorn and see what that's going to look like here. Now, for the Strike of the Stormhorn, it does look really cool. I do love the splash that we see at the end. It is really nice. And I am finding that this one actually did receive a much bigger upgrade than the Okuns Catalyst. This one does seem to do more damage. It doesn't look quite as cool as the Okuns Catalyst, but it is doing more damage and it is really fun to play. So that being said, you guys can see we are tearing everything up, but once again, really just in the outer world. Like I mentioned earlier, you definitely can take this into pit level 100 and you can complete it. I'm finding that it's taking me about 5 minutes or so to complete it, in some cases a little bit longer. So it's not going to be the fastest, and I wouldn't say this is the best speedrunning one for the pit. But if you're looking to take this into anything else, like I mentioned, this is handling Hell Tides, Witch Tides. You can take this into any other content besides pit tiers 110 and higher. So with that said, if you guys are still interested and you want to take advantage of this build and utilize it, we'll go back to town so I can show you guys exactly what's making this work. All right, so first we'll take a look at the gear. Now, I will admit that this build is working as well as it's working right now because we are also taking advantage of the lightning spear. That is still doing a tremendous amount of damage. However, if you don't use lightning spear, which you don't have to, you're still going to be able to do a lot of damage and you're still going to be able to take on the outer world content a little bit slower, not quite as quick as what we were doing, but it's not going to do very well when it comes down to the pit. Ideally, we want a build that's going to be pretty well-rounded so that way we can use it for everything. But like I mentioned, if you're just using this specifically for speed farming and you're staying out of pit levels 110 and higher, this is going to work really well for you. So starting off with the gear for the weapon, and this is one of the first times where we get to use a wand this season versus having to use a staff, we are going to be using the intercom aspect with this. We want to have intelligence, maximum life, and we're going to throw on some critical strike damage because remember, we are going to be using the splintering energy aspect with this, and so we want to make sure that we have very high critical strike damage in order to work well with that. Now that said, for our tempering, we want to temper on critical strike damage and we want to temper on chance for lightning spear to deal double damage. As you can see, I was not able to roll critical strike damage with this, so you can't take this a little bit further than where I'm currently at with it. However, ultimately, like I mentioned, we are still having to lean into that lightning spear portion in order to get as far as we're getting with this. Now, looking at masterworking this, you want to put all 3 points of your masterwork into chance for lightning spear to deal double damage. Next up, we've got our boots. For our boots, we're using the concussive strikes aspect, and that's going to allow us to daze our enemies, which in turn also allows us to deal an additional up to 25% damage. Now, when we're looking at this, we do want to have boots that have the implicit of reducing your evade's cooldown by 1.5 seconds when you attack. We're attacking all of the time. That's how we're able to teleport nonstop without having a teleport cooldown. So really important to have that if you like the ability to be able to teleport all the time. Now, stats-wise, we want to take intelligence, maximum life, and armor. We're going to temper on chance to freeze, and we're also going to temper on evade cooldown reduction. Again, this is what's allowing us to be able to constantly teleport without having to wait for any type of cooldown. Now, when we masterwork this guy, ideally, we want to throw all 3 points of your masterwork into intelligence. Taking a look at our pants, we are going to be using Tibalt's Will with this. The additional damage we're getting and the unstoppable is just too good for us not to take. So we want to make sure we get this. If you get a GA, I would try to get a GA on all stats or maximum life. One of those two would be super helpful. But the most important part about this is that we're getting a 20% roll at the bottom. That's what's going to give you the most damage output possible. When you're masterworking this, I would recommend putting all 3 points into all stats. Next up, for our gloves, we're going to be using the Storm Swell aspect with this, and I think that one was to be expected. When we look at our stats for this, we want to take intelligence, attack speed, and crit strike damage, and then we're going to be tempering on chance to freeze and some additional critical strike damage as well. Now, when we look at masterworking, we want to try to hit all 3 points into critical strike damage, and specifically the one that we've tempered on. That one's going to be able to maximize on your overall crit strike damage, and it's going to give you quite a bit more than we're getting from the crit strike damage from the stat at the top. Next up, we've got our chest armor. Now, you can go 2 ways with the chest armor. However, I'm finding this one to be the most helpful. We're using the Shroud of False Death. If you don't have the Shroud of False Death, you can use the Raiment of the Infinite. That one does work really well too. The stun is also helpful with that, and it allows you to pull your enemies in. So there's a few different benefits to using the Raiment of the Infinite. And then for this guy, we want to get one with a GA on all stats if possible. And then we're going to put all 3 points of masterworking into all stats as well. For our helmet, we're going to be using Shaco. The Shaco's cooldown reduction is just too great for us to not take. Plus, we're getting an additional +4 to all skills. We have about 18 or 19 skill points into Ball Lightning, and that's what's allowing us to deal as much damage as we're dealing with that. So definitely want to take Shaco. And then when masterworking this, we want to try to get all 3 points into cooldown reduction. That additional 55% that you can potentially get on this is really, really good and super helpful to have. For our amulet, this is where we're going to be putting the splintering energy aspect. This is going to be able to give you the most amount of damage output for your lightning spear. Since we're not using a staff with this, is going to be the best place for that. Now, looking at the stats, we want to take intelligence. If you can get one that's got ranks to Inner Flames and ranks to Permafrost or Hoarfrost, that's going to be great. Any combination of those two would be the best way to go. If not, attack speed would be great as well. You can't really go wrong with any of those, but the best possible scenario would be to get 2 passive skill ranks if you can to 2 different skills. That would be a really good way to go. For our tempering, for this guy, we are going to take evade cooldown reduction, and then once again, we're going to take critical strike damage. Now, when you masterwork this, I would try to get all 3 points into Permafrost or Inner Flames, depending on which one you have. Again, that's going to give you the most amount of damage output possible. If you're not able to get any passive skills on your amulet, then throw all 3 of your masterworking skills into critical strike damage that you've tempered on. Next up for our rings, our first ring is going to be the Ring of Starless Skies. This one's a little bit of a no-brainer. We're getting a lot of attack speed for this. You're also getting additional 50% times additional damage, and this really helps us with our resource as well, so really good to have. Now for this guy, we want to try to throw all 3 masterworking points into attack speed. Right now I've been able to get 2, and it's got my attack speed up to 40.2% from just this one item. So there is definitely more opportunity to make this even better here, but attack speed is the way that we want to go. And then for our second ring, we're going to be using Tall Rashas. Now for this guy, we want to try to get one that's got 25% times additional damage at the bottom for the unique effect. And then for our masterworking, we want to try to get all 3 masterworking points into cooldown reduction. I was lucky enough to find one with a GA on cooldown reduction, but this is going to take it even further. And then lastly, for our offhand, now depending on which one of these you like better, we're either going to be using Strike of Stormhorn or we're going to be using Okuns Catalyst. Now, like I showed you guys, both of these will work really well in the outer world, but the Strike of the Stormhorn seems to work a little bit better when you're going into pit tiers level 100. So again, it really depends on what your preference is and which one you like better, but both of these would work. Now, when looking at masterworking this, we're going to try to put all 3 points into chance for ball lightning projectiles to cast twice, and that's going to be the same thing for your Okuns Catalyst as well. After trying to masterwork this multiple times, somehow I was able to land on ball lightning for both of these guys, but ultimately the better way to go for this is going to be the chance for ball lightning projectiles to cast twice. Now for our gems, we're using emeralds for our weapon and for our offhand. For our pants, we're going to be using topaz. And then looking at our runes, for our helmet, we're going to be using Sir and Zan. For our chest armor, we're going to be using Bach and the Cax rune. Now for our occult gems, we're using Friend of the Bog for our amulet. We're going to be using Pointed Finger for one of our rings. And then for the second ring, we're using Hungering Void. If you're using Raiment of the Infinite with this, you probably are not going to need to use Hungering Void. So if that is the case, then I would recommend using the Toadling's Wish instead. But if you're using Shroud of False Death, which is what I would recommend doing, then you're going to need to have Hungering Void on here. That said, let's go ahead and take a look at our skill tree. So for our skill tree, we're just going to put 2 points into whatever skill we can so we can move on down to our core skills. For our core skills, we're going to put 1 point into charged bolts. We're going to take it down to enhanced charged bolts and then finish it up with destructive charged bolts. Now, we also have 1 point into potent warding just because we need to have another point to be able to move on down to the next section. But the reason we're picking the charged bolts option here is because we are constantly using unstable currents, which means charged bolts is also casting pretty frequently. It's not the damage that we're after here, although that does help. It's going to be mostly for the damage reduction that we're going to be getting from the destructive charged bolts down here at the bottom. So it is helpful in some way. Now, moving on down to our defensive skills, we're going to put 1 point into Flame Shield. We're going to take it up to Enhanced Flame Shield, and we'll finish it up with Mystical Flame Shield. We are also going to be putting 5 points into Teleport. We'll take it on up to Enhanced Teleport, and then we're going to finish it up with Shimmering Teleport. Next up, Glass Cannon. We're going to put 3 points into this. We're also going to take 1 point into Ice Armor, taking it down to Enhanced Ice Armor, and then finishing it up with Mystical Ice Armor. Now then lastly, we've got Frost Nova. We're taking that one down to Enhanced Frost Nova, and we're finishing it up with Mystical Frost Nova. We are not using Frost Nova on our skill bar, but Frost Nova is going to be one of our enhancements. And then the second one is going to be Teleport, and that's how we're able to get away with the unlimited teleport, is by having it on our enchantments. And then moving on down to our conjuration skills, we are taking 1 point into Ice Blades, taking it up to Enhanced Ice Blades, and finishing it up with Roaring Ice Blades. And then we also will be taking 1 point into Align the Elements, just so that we can make our way over to Protection, where we're going to be putting 2 points into this. Next up, we've got Lightning Spear. We are dealing a lot of damage with Lightning Spear. However, we don't want this to necessarily be the star of the show. So we're only going to put 1 point into Lightning Spear. We're going to take it down to Enhanced Lightning Spear, and then finish it up with Roaring Lightning Spear. And then we've also got 3 points into Primordial Binding, and 3 points into Mana Shield. And then lastly, for the conjuration skills, we are taking Familiar for 1 point, taking it down to Enhanced Familiar, and then finishing it up with Invoked Familiar. And then for our mastery skills, we are going to be taking 3 points into Inner Flames. We're going to put 5 points into Ball Lightning, taking it down to Enhanced Ball Lightning, and finishing it up with Mage's Ball Lightning. For our ultimate skills, we are first going to be taking 3 points into Permafrost. We've got 3 points into Icy Touch, and 3 points into Hoarfrost. And then we will be taking just 1 point into Unstable Currents and taking it down to Prime Unstable Currents. And then on the right hand side, we are taking 3 points into Elemental Synergies and 3 points into Evocation. And then lastly, for our skill tree, for our key passive, we will be taking Enlightenment. Now then, taking a look at our Paragon board, for our first board, we are taking Destruction. Moving up to the second board, we're going to be taking the Static Surge board, and this one we're going to be pairing up with Elementalist. And then for our third board, we're going to go on over to the right, where we're going to be taking the Elemental Summoner board, and this we're going to be pairing up with the Control Glyph. For our fourth board, we'll make our way over to the top left, and this board is going to be the Searing Heat board, and this is going to be paired up with Tactician. And then for our fifth and final board, we're going to be taking Frigid Fate, and this we're going to be pairing up with Unleash. Now, taking a look at our Mercenary, we are going to be taking Rahir, and he's going to be using Ground Slam, taking it down to Rahir's Aegis, Bastion, and finally Inspiration. For our reinforcement, we're taking Aldkin, who's going to be using Field of Languish, and this is going to be paired up with Ball Lightning. We're casting Ball Lightning all of the time, so this is going to be triggering as frequently as possible. And then, like I mentioned earlier, for our enchantments, we are taking Frost Nova and also the Teleport enchantment. This works really well because Frost Nova does make our enemies vulnerable, and it also is giving us an additional 15% times increased damage, so really good to have. With that said, that's all I've got for you guys for today. Let me know in the comments which one of these two different uniques you guys plan to use for your Ball Lightning Sorceress build. Thank you guys so much for joining me and watching this video. If you guys like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Until next time, Wanderers.